My vote doesn't count. Today we're going to be talking about the state that has the least right to say that their vote doesn't count, and that's Texas. While Texas is the most common state where I get people saying, oh, my vote doesn't count, my vote doesn't do anything, we're so red. Texas is the most important state in the country for people to vote in. So regardless of if you live in Texas or not, I need you to watch this video 100% of the way through, and I need you to share this far and wide because I want every single person in Texas to be able to listen to it. Let's start with the presidential election in 2020. Could Texas have gone blue? The voter turnout rate was 66.7%, but Donald Trump only won with 52%. But what does that really mean? That means that Texas only needed 631,000 votes to flip blue. Does that sound like a lot? Well, no, because that 631,000 represents 24% of the Democratic voters who stayed home. That means if a quarter of the people in Texas who are registered to vote and were expected to vote Democrat, if only a quarter of those people actually went to the polls, then Texas would have been blue. But Nick, nobody likes Biden in Texas. Okay, well, what about the governor? You know who else nobody likes in Texas? Greg Abbott. In the 2022 election, Greg Abbott won by 54%, but the voter turnout rate was less than half, 45%. What does that mean? That means that only 1/5 of the people who stayed home who are expected to vote for Democrat could have flipped Texas blue. And I'm not just talking about 1/5 of non-voters in general, because only 9% of non-voters in general would have had to vote against Abbott. I'm talking about 21% of the people who align politically with Beto. If 21% of the people who stayed home from the polls but were registered and supported Beto would have gone to the polls, then Abbott would not be in office right now. Only a freaking 1/5 of you had to do it, and you could not manage that. Am I yelling? Yes, because as bad as that is, it gets worse. In 2018, when Beto O'Rourke ran against Ted Cruz, and we know how Texans or anyone else feels about Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz only won with 50.89%. He only barely scraped above half. But the voter turnout rate in Texas was 53%. So how many Democratic voters who stayed home would have had to go to the polls to vote against Ted Cruz in order to have a blue senator in Texas? 6%. That is right. 6%. Out of every 100 of you who are likely to vote blue but stayed home, if only 6 came to the polls, then Ted Cruz wouldn't be in office right now. And this is why I bitch all the time about progressives in Texas. If you're a progressive in Texas and you don't think your vote counts, then you are purposefully buying in to the propaganda. But Nick, voter suppression. Yes, Texas does have voter suppression. I've talked about this so many times, and if you really cared about the voter suppression in Texas, you would have gone and looked it up. In Texas, they guarantee that you have time off from work to go vote. This is me also talking about the free ride-sharing services that are nonprofits in Texas that'll take you to the polls. This is me also talking about the Texas early voting policy. If you can't make it to the polls on election day because your employer wants to break the law, you've got almost 2 weeks to go vote. Okay, but Nick, what about Texas scrubbing voter registration? I've talked about this several times too. This is me talking about how you can look up your voter registration in Texas to make sure that you're still registered. Okay, but Nick, you don't know if all of those people that didn't vote would have voted Democrat. Yes, we do. This is Texas, and this is me talking about Texas. This is the lineup of registered voters who actually vote in Texas. There are more blue voters than there are red or purple voters. The problem is the people who sometimes vote in Texas aren't guaranteed to actually vote every time. This is accounting voter suppression because all of these people in that graph have voted in many elections. They are just not reliable voters. They don't show up to the polls because they choose not to. There are more blue voters than there are red and purple voters in Texas. The blue voters just don't care. They've bought into the propaganda that Ted Cruz and Greg Abbott perpetuate, and they don't think their vote matters because they don't want their vote to matter. Texas voters would rather sit around and be mad instead of getting up and actually doing something. But the thing is, the math doesn't work out that way. If you live in Texas, your vote counts, especially if you're a Democratic voter, more than it counts literally anywhere in the country. And if you want to prove to me that your vote doesn't count, actually go out and freaking vote. I don't care if you don't like Colin Allred. I'm pretty sure that you like him a lot more than you like Ted Cruz. But Ted Cruz in Texas is somehow leading the polls by 4 points. You have a way to prove that your vote doesn't count. If you really want to make that point clear, go out and vote. Make that turnout rate go to 100% or as damn near close as you can. And then if Ted Cruz still wins, you might have a point. But sitting around and complaining about it, as you did for Greg Abbott, as you did for Donald Trump, that is a very poor way to illustrate that point. If you want to say that your vote doesn't count, go out and fucking prove it.